to another episode of Voices as part of the Free Yourself Global campaign, where we're exploring domestic violence globally. And I'm really thankful today to have Liliana on our show. She's Brazilian and she's being extremely brave about sharing her story about her experience of domestic violence. Hello, Liliana.
Hi, how are you?
Good,
I'm glad to be here today.
good. So you're in an unusual situation because I'm actually speaking to you from a shelter. Um,
Yes, that's right.
yeah. So perhaps you can share how you ended up there. What is your story?
Well, my story is a little bit complicated because I'm not from the original place that I'm talking from now. I'm not from here. I'm from Brazil. And I came to live here, and I have no relatives. And my story got complicated when I started having an affair with my husband, and we had a baby together.
I can hear your baby
When
in the
my baby,
background. Is that her?
yes,
Mhm.
yes, it is. Should we try again
No,
to
keep
talk?
going. It's fine for you to share your story with your baby. It's okay.
Okay. So I have no relatives and no friends that I could come to. So I had to look for a shelter where I could be in security.
Mm. But
I suffered a psychological and abuse, and I was locked up in my house. I couldn't leave with the baby anywhere, and I had to run away from home.
mm.
And it was very hard for me.
And so how old is your baby now?
She is a month old now,
Wow.
a month and 15 days.
Wow.
Yes.
So that's very young. So Uh, what were the signs for you? Like, because you're saying you experienced psychological abuse and emotional abuse is something that people are still trying to understand because so often we're used to, relating to physical violence or sexual violence. So, tell me, like, how you became aware that you were experiencing emotional abuse and what did that look like?
Well, it took quite a long time for me to realize that I was being abused until I started to feel very depressed, and I was ashamed to talk about my story with other people. I started to feel really not like I should feel not happy for having my baby. I started feeling guilty for things that I wasn't guilty about, and my self-esteem was really low. And I thought that I didn't deserve to have what I had in my house and my life. And that's when I started to see things were getting a little bit strange because I was always a happy person and I always loved to help other people. And I was feeling like I wasn't receiving the same love and help that I was giving away. So the first signs were depression and low self-esteem. And I started feeling like I didn't deserve to have the life I had. Those were the first feelings I started seeing that were not normal in my day.
Mm. And you mentioned when we talked earlier about your experience of when you had your baby in the hospital and that uh, when your ex-partner was coming to visit, that a nurse had pointed out to you some symptoms of abuse that perhaps you hadn't recognized yourself. What was that conversation about? How did she help you there?
Yes, so I was abused in my house, and I really didn't have the chance to see it for myself. So another person actually realized it before I did. She came to talk to me on the day my baby was born. It was a social worker, and she said that she had seen signs on my husband, that he was very possessive and very aggressive, and that he had obsession with the child. And she said that I also was looking too, I didn't have self-esteem, and that I was always very sad. I wasn't happy about it when my baby was born. I was looking like I was afraid of going home. She said that it looked like I wasn't happy about going home.
Mm.
She realized that.
Mm. It can
Things that
be
I couldn't see for myself.
Yeah. So it can be common for, some women to experience postnatal depression after a baby, especially their first one. So what were the can you tell me like actual things that were done or said by your ex-husband that enabled you to see that it was abuse, not something that would be classified in some other way by, a physician as postnatal depression or something like that? Could you give us some
Well, it
specifics?
started. It started by putting my self-esteem down. So I thought that I wasn't good enough to have my own baby, to live my own life. Always thinking that there was always somebody better than me. That I didn't deserve to have what I had. Like I didn't deserve to live the house that I lived in. I didn't deserve to be the mother that I am now. Always talking about how poor spirit I was, and how ugly I looked, and how I was stupid, and
So he,
how other people were so much smarter than me,
so he
and
would
other
say
mothers
those
were
kinds of
more
things.
careful.
So he would say those kinds of things
Yes,
to you.
he would.
Yeah.
He would say that to me. He would say that to me, not the way I'm saying to you now, but in a more hurtful way. You know, like when we were having our conversations and I was happy trying to tell him something about how good I felt, he would always put me down, saying, "Oh, why do you feel so good about that? You don't even deserve that. You're so ugly. You're so pathetic." And these things really put me down. And every day I thought I was a worse person. So I didn't want to go out in the street to be with other people because I don't think I deserved it. I didn't want to talk to anybody about my problem because I thought I was stupid and I felt ashamed of it. I thought that maybe I was making myself a victim and I wasn't really a victim. Because when I would tell him how I felt and what I felt, he said, "Oh, you're trying to victimize yourself. It's so ridiculous. Oh, poor you." So I
Mm.
always felt like whatever I was saying was all in my head, that other people would go through that and they didn't feel like I felt.
Mm.
So
It must be a very
that's the way
isolating
that he would
experience.
disguise.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And then
Sorry.
the controlling possessive behaviors increase after your baby was born. Is that what led to you finally choosing to get out?
Yes, when I started realizing what was going on, he put some cameras in the house to film me, so I couldn't leave without him knowing. And he had his mother inside the house also, watching over me. He would call all the time. He wouldn't let me leave the house without the baby. He had to be with me, and we had to go together wherever he wanted to go, and that usually would be only to the doctor. I didn't have the right to go to a park or anywhere with my child. I was
Mm.
like the babysitter instead of being the mother.
Mm. And so, given that you're living in a country that's not your native country, and no relatives here, how did you find a way out? Because I imagine, there were certain limitations that you faced around uh, knowing people, or money limitations, or like how did
Yes,
you learn about?
actually, I had no job because he wouldn't let me work anymore. He would keep me inside the house all the time, so I didn't have any information either to what I could do and where I could go. I started searching in the internet on the computer places, and I saw many places that I could go, but actually the person who actually helped me was somebody in the street. I went to look for a job interview, and this lady told me about a place I could go that was special for women that suffered psychological and physical abuse. And that's how I heard about the place, and I called, and they set a time for me to be there, and I ran away with the baby. I got there, and they saved my life. They took me and my baby as if I was part of their family. I left with no clothes, with no money, with nothing. I went straight to the shelter.
Mm. And so how did you get out? Like if he was locking you in the house, or keeping you in the house in some way, how did you get out
So
to go to that interview?
That interview was something that a social worker had gotten for me. So that same social worker from the hospital, she kept me over her eyes. So I would have to go to all these interviews so that she would know I was okay. Actually, it wasn't really for a job or nothing. She was
Mm.
just watching me. And so that day I had an interview, and he was obligated to give me one of my documents. That was my residence card from the place where I am, Portugal, and I had to go to the interview. So I went by myself, and he stayed home with the baby. I went to the interview. I met this woman who sent me where I went. I don't know if I can say the name of the place.
Yeah, better best not. But anyway, yeah. So she sent you, it was like to a shelter
She
or a
sent me
counseling clinic.
to
Yeah,
this shelter.
yeah,
She told me about the shelter, and when I arrived home, he was home with the baby, but his mother had left. She met some guy in the street and went to have some coffee with him.
yeah.
So he was alone in the house with the baby, and he was giving the baby a bath. And when I came home, he had to go back to work. And in his job, he kept me on cameras, but I knew that it would take him at least 15 minutes to get there. So I packed everything up as soon as he left the door. I put whatever I could inside a little bag for the baby, some diapers and some clothes. And as soon as he went down, I left running down the stairs, and I caught a cab and left. I ran away. I really ran away. It took me 5 minutes to do that.
That must have been hard for you, right? Because you
Five.
had a cesarean section only 4 weeks earlier or
Yes,
three
I
weeks
had
earlier.
just had a cesarean. I lived on the sixth floor with no elevator. I had nobody to help me go down. But I was so scared, and I was so sure that I needed this help that none of that mattered. I was afraid of him coming back and seeing me going back down halfway the stairs. But I did it anyway. When I was packing, I was afraid that he might probably have forgotten something at home. It would come back right in the door. But I had to be strong. I had to do it. It was the only chance I had. So with all my fright, well, with all my scaredness, and I was very frightened, but I had to do that for me and for my child. So it was
Mm.
5 minutes of terror, and that's how I got out. I really ran away
Mm.
and as fast as I could
And
by myself.
have you been getting support and counseling since you've been in the shelters now?
Yes, I have. I have been. I've been getting more support, and I've had all my life here after I came to Portugal.
Mm.
And
And
I'm not home with my family, but at least I have everything I need, and so does my baby. I'm getting counseling. I have a lawyer that's going to help me on my case because it's obvious that he's the father, and I can't be without her birth certificate and all the documents that he has with him because he used to hold our documents. We never had a chance to have the documents in hand, not even me or her documents. So I get counseling, psychological help, and I get a lawyer that can help me decide what to do and how to do this part of the process, right? Because it's not only running away and just locking yourself up in the shelter. You have to get back on your feet, and you have to start living again. You can't be hiding from everybody all the time.
mm.
We have to go back to our own lives, find a job, get our social security back together, our numbers, and I don't know how to speak this in English very well, but we have to get our lives back. We have to put our feet on the ground. Our baby has to go to school. We have to go to a job. So it's important to know that these places, they arrange for us not only psychological help, but they have a lawyer to help us defend ourselves, and they help us find a job. They help us find a house. They help us in all the ways that we need to be supported.
Mm, that's fantastic. And also because, it's difficult to think that, you know, when, you experience abuse, you're the one that has to leave the home and get displaced and go into hiding. I mean, that's a really tough situation to be in.
Yes,
So
it
there
feels
must
like
be,
we're the prisoners.
Yeah, you feel
Feels
like you,
like we are the aggressors, right? Because we have to leave our house and without our things, right? Our personal things, and we
mm,
have to be inside a place locked up because we can't go in the street, or else we'll be found by these men. And it's really hard, and it's very sad that we have to go through this. But it's at least it's one way that we find to get ourselves back on our feet and to get rid of this pain and suffering that we have in our own houses. That is
mm,
also a bad place to be.
mm. And so then they must, the hiding can only be temporary at some point. There's a sense of safety, like not only within yourself that you feel like you can keep yourself safe, but that you're also safe from him legally and financially and physically. But there must be like a planning process or something that the shelter works with you on in terms of what is the plan to get you back onto your feet and independent again and out of this security situation. So, can you tell us about the process of that planning that you've been going through?
Yes, they do. They do help us with a plan, right? It's a plan of life. We have to start everything over again. So first, they help us feel secure of ourselves because it's very hard for us to be psychologically and mentally assured of who we are again. Because after so many abuse, we don't feel like we're able to get a job. We're always scared and of going out in the street and being found. So they work that with us so that we know that we are secure in a place that we know that they're not going to show up. They help us plan a job, plan a shelter house for ourselves, a home for us to find a home, and that's the plan. The plan is going back to normal life. The
Mm,
plan is it's not a miracle plan, but it's a plan that we can hard. We have to make it work. We have to be assured of ourselves too, because nobody can secure us that one day probably we will ever meet them again. But as soon as we are working and we have our own house and we are stable, then we can also learn how to defend ourselves, right?
mm, yeah. And so tell me, Liliana, what are the main things that you've learnt through this really traumatic process, for yourself and also for your daughter, about, yourself and what you see about this dynamic of abuse in relationship and how not to, find yourself in those patterns again, like because you've been doing some counseling work. So what have you learnt for yourself through that process?
Well, the first thing is that when two people love each other, they share love. They don't share insults and abuse. So if you feel like you're being insulted and verbally insulted, physically insulted, psychologically insulted, it's the first sign that something is going on and it's not right. So you, when you're in a relationship, you're supposed to give and you're supposed to get back. If you're only giving and not getting anything back, that's also a good sign of being abused. When you feel like you have nobody you can count on and you have somebody at home living with you that you can't talk to, that gives you no emotional security, somebody that behaves like as if you were their maid and slave and not their wives and part of the family, that's another abuse. And when you start feeling too sad about being yourself and too locked up at home and you don't feel like you have friends anymore, you can't go out because you're ashamed of yourself, that's another abuse. I think all these signs are signs that you are being abused and you should look for help.
Mm,
I was also breastfeeding at the time, and he wouldn't let me breastfeed. He would take my baby to the street and stay 12 hours in the street with her. I felt a lot of pain, and I think that's also physical abuse. I used to feel like giving my baby a bath, and I couldn't. His mother wouldn't allow me to. So basic things that I wanted to do in my own house, I couldn't do, like cooking the food I wanted to eat. I had to cook whatever he wanted to eat, and I only could cook what he would buy. I couldn't buy things for myself. So when you don't have authority in your own house, you have to live by other people's rules, by the way other people want, the way that they want you to live, the way that they want you to dress, and you can't have your own thoughts. You have to think like they want you to think. Those are all signs of abuse.
Mm. Well, I thank you so much because I know technically you're still at risk insofar as that you're in the shelters and you're still finding your way to independence, and it's still quite new for you being out of the household with your ex-husband. So I really thank you so much for being so brave to talk about this because especially when the trauma is still so new and so raw, I know that can be so difficult. Um,
Yes, it's even hard to explain what I'm still feeling and what I feel because I was really, really mentally abused. So I'm still trying to figure out who I am and what the best of me can bring to my daughter. It's been very hard.
mm. Well, I've been privileged enough to see your little girl, and she's beautiful and such a little peaceful soul, despite everything that she's been through with you. So
Yes.
I'm sure that she will be fine with you. And
Thank
yeah,
you.
and I really thank you for sharing your story, Liliana, because it's there's so many of these kinds of scenarios around the world, and the idea of emotional abuse is still quite new in terms of defining what abuse looks like. And for some people, it's hard for them to identify what is acceptable behavior, what's not acceptable behavior, and what is
Yes,
abusive and what isn't. And so, learning how to set those boundaries, even be able to recognize it in the first instance when it becomes quite habitual, is a real challenge. So, really, I thank
yes,
you so much for sharing your story. And I'm sure that, as people around the world listen to what you've been through, they may or be able to identify some things for themselves. And hopefully we can make a
yes.
difference.
I just think that the women can't be ashamed of looking for help because they're psychologically abused. Psychological abuse doesn't leave bruises outside, but it leaves bruises inside. So just take care and look for help. That's
Mm,
all.
and thank you so much. And we'll definitely be
Thank you.
following you on this program, Liliana, to make sure. I know that you're with some great people now, but we want to make sure that you stay safe too.
Thanks
Be-
a lot. And the baby also thanks everybody. Thank
okay.
you.
Thank you.